There are sentences you never forget, not because they are cruel in an obvious way, not because they arrive with raised voices or dramatic confrontation, but because of what they reveal, quietly, completely, in the space of a single breath, about the person who said them. My son said his sentence to me on a Thursday morning in February at 9:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been watching the clock on my kitchen wall for 23 minutes, sitting in the chair by the window with my left arm, feeling wrong in a way I could not fully describe but could not ignore, waiting for him to answer my call. He answered on the fifth ring. "Dad, hey, this isn't a great time. We're in the middle of walking Biscuit. Can I call you back in like an hour?" Biscuit is his Labrador, Stephen, I said. My chest feels tight and my left arm has been. "Dad, I'm sure it's nothing. You always worry. Can you call Dr. Patterson's office? They'll probably just tell you to rest." "Stephen, Dad, I really can't right now. Biscuit gets anxious when we stop mid-walk. I'll call you in an hour, okay?" He hung up. I sat in my chair by the window for 30 seconds. Then I called someone else. And everything that happened after that, everything that is still happening now, began with that second call. My name is Gerald Thomas Whitfield. I am 70 years old. I spent 36 years as a high school history teacher and department head, and I have been retired for 4 years. My son chose a dog walk over his father's chest pains. He had absolutely no idea what I was about to set in motion. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. No interruptions, just the story. Get comfortable. I want to be fair to Stephen before I tell you what he did and what I did about it, because Stephen is not a bad person. He is something more complicated than a bad person. He is a good person who had, over the course of several years, allowed his priorities to arrange themselves in a way that left his father near the bottom of a list that should have had him near the top. Stephen Gerald Whitfield, 42 years old. He worked in corporate communications for a pharmaceutical company in the city. Good salary, stable, the kind of job that sounds impressive at dinner parties and involves a great deal of email. He had married a woman named Michelle 6 years ago. Michelle was pleasant and organized and had opinions about most things, including, I had noticed how Stephen spent his time. He was not neglectful in the dramatic sense. He called, not as often as he once had, but he called. He came for Thanksgiving, most years. He had remembered my last 2 birthdays, though the second one he had remembered on the day itself, and called at 9 in the evening with the slightly guilty energy of someone who had almost forgotten, but not quite. He was busy. That was the explanation he reached for most often, and it was not untrue. But busy is a choice, always, in what it excludes. I had noticed, over the 4 years since my retirement, that the calls had grown shorter, that the visits had grown less frequent. That when I called and reached voicemail, the return call sometimes came the same day, and sometimes came 3 days later, and twice had not come at all until I called again. I had not said anything about this. I am not a man who complains. 36 years of teaching high school history had given me a particular tolerance for the long view. The understanding that things develop over time, that patterns matter more than individual moments, and that patience was almost always more useful than reaction. But I had been watching the pattern. And on a Thursday morning in February, when my left arm felt wrong and my chest felt tight, and I called my son for help, and he told me Biscuit the Labrador needed to finish his walk, the pattern became something I could no longer watch. From a distance, I sat in my chair for 30 seconds after Stephen hung up. Then I called my neighbor, Dorothy Pemberton, 73 years old, recently widowed, sharp as a tack, and possessed of a 2019 Honda CR-V and the specific no-nonsense energy of a woman who had raised 4 children and was not impressed by emergencies. She picked up on the second ring. "Gerald, what's wrong?" "Dorothy, I think I need to go to St. Luke's. My chest is tight and my left arm. I'm pulling out of the driveway in 3 minutes," she said. "Unlock your front door." She was there in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. We were at St. Luke's Medical Center by 10:23 in the morning. Dorothy walked me through the emergency entrance, told the intake nurse my symptoms with the precise efficiency of someone who did not waste words, and sat in the waiting room for the next 4 hours without being asked and without complaining. The doctor on call was named Dr. Amara Singh. Thorough, direct, the kind of physician who tells you what she knows and what she doesn't in equal measure. She told me at noon, mild heart attack. Not the catastrophic kind, the warning kind. The kind your body sends when it has been trying to get your attention and has finally decided to speak loudly enough to be heard. "You did the right thing coming in when you did," she said. Another hour or two and this conversation might have been considerably more serious. I thought about Biscuit the Labrador, somewhere in the city, finishing his walk. "I had help," I said. I looked through the window at Dorothy in the waiting room, reading a magazine with her reading glasses on, completely unbothered. Good help," Dr. Singh said. "The best," I said. Stephen called at 11:47, just over 2 hours after he had told me he would call in one. I did not answer. I was at that point in the middle of an EKG. He called again at 1:15. I was speaking with Dr. Singh. He called a third time at 2:30. I was resting. I answered the fourth call at 3:45 from my hospital bed. Dad, hey, sorry it took me a bit to call back. We ended up stopping for coffee after the walk, and then Michelle wanted to look at some things at the... He stopped. Something in my silence told him something was wrong. Dad, you there? I'm at St. Luke's, I said. Room 214, cardiac care unit. The line went completely quiet. What? I had a mild heart attack this morning, I said. Dorothy Pemberton drove me. I've been here since 10:20, Dad. His voice had changed entirely. Dad, why didn't you? I would have. You were walking, the biscuit said. I didn't want to interrupt. Silence. I'm coming right now, he said. You don't need to rush, I said. I'm stable. Dr. Singh says I'll likely be here 2 or 3 days. There's no emergency. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. Stephen, I said. Drive safely. I'll see you when you get here. I hung up. Dorothy came in 20 minutes later with terrible hospital coffee and a crossword puzzle book she had bought from the gift shop. Your son called the nurse's station, she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. They told him you were resting. Good, I said. She looked at me over her reading glasses. You're planning something, she said. I'm resting, I said. Gerald Thomas Whitfield, she said. I have known you for 11 years. You are planning something. I looked at the ceiling of room 214 for a moment. I'm thinking, I said. There's a difference. Not with you there isn't, she said. And she opened her crossword puzzle book. Stephen arrived at 5:30. He came in with Michelle, both of them slightly out of breath, wearing the specific expression of people who have spent a car ride trying to calibrate the appropriate response to a situation they feel guilty about. He sat beside my bed and held my hand, and said he was sorry 3 times in the first 5 minutes. Michelle stood near the window and said the right things in the right order. I was kind. I want to be clear about that. I did not make a scene. I did not list his failures or perform my hurt. I told him I was fine, that Dr. Singh was excellent, that the prognosis was good. I told him Dorothy had been wonderful. He flinched slightly at Dorothy's name. Good. They stayed for 90 minutes. When they left, Stephen hugged me at the door and told me he would be back tomorrow morning. First thing. He was, and the morning after. And he drove me home when I was discharged on Saturday. I did not say anything during those visits about the Thursday morning phone call. I did not bring it up. I let it sit in the room with us, unaddressed, the way significant things sometimes need to sit before they can be dealt with properly. But I was thinking. I had spent 36 years teaching history, which means I had spent 36 years thinking about patterns, about how individual moments accumulate into movements, how small choices compound into legacies, how the things people do when they believe they are not being watched are the things that ultimately define them. Stephen had chosen a dog walk. That was one moment. But it was also the distillation of 4 years of shorter calls and later responses, and a father who had been sliding gradually from essential to optional. And I had, in 4 years of watching that pattern, never said a single word about it. That was my part of it. I want to own that honestly. I had been patient in the way that sometimes crosses the line into enabling. Patient in a way that had allowed Stephen to believe, without anyone correcting him, that things were fine. Things were not fine, and I was done allowing my silence to suggest otherwise. I called my attorney, a careful man named Robert Okafor. On the Monday after I came home, Robert had handled my affairs since Beverly passed. Beverly was my wife, gone 8 years now, and her absence was the fact of my life that made all other facts arrange themselves around it. He listened to everything I told him without interrupting. That was one of the things I valued most about Robert. He understood that the first job of a good advisor was to hear the complete picture before offering anything. When I finished, he asked 2 questions. Whether I was making these decisions from a place of clarity rather than temporary emotion, and whether I understood that some of what I was considering would be difficult to reverse. I told him I had been thinking about this for 4 years and had spent the last 5 days in a hospital bed, thinking about it more carefully than I had ever thought about anything. I told him I understood exactly what I was doing and why. He nodded. I could feel it through the phone, the specific nod of a man who has decided he believes you. Tell me what you want, he said. My estate was not enormous. I want to be accurate about this. Beverly and I had lived modestly and saved carefully, and what we had built over 40 years of careful living was respectable but not dramatic. The house on Callaway Street paid off in 2018. A savings account. Beverly's life insurance, which I had invested carefully after her passing. A small portfolio that Robert managed. Total, across everything, approximately $840,000. My existing will left everything to Stephen, with a small bequest to our church and a scholarship in Beverly's name at the school, where she had taught elementary school for 29 years. I did not remove Stephen entirely. I want to be precise about this because precision matters. I restructured. The church bequest I increased substantially. The scholarship in Beverly's name I increased to a level that would fund it in perpetuity. I added a direct bequest to Dorothy Pemberton, $50,000, to do with exactly as she pleased, with a note attached that I had written myself and that said simply, "For being the person who showed up." I added provisions for 2 of my former students, young men I had mentored through difficult circumstances, who had gone on to build good lives and who called me every few months reliably, just to talk. 10,000 each, in recognition of what showing up actually looked like. Stephen's share I reduced to 40% of the remaining estate after the above provisions. Not nothing. I was his father and I loved him, and 40% of what remained was still a meaningful number. But not everything, not anymore. Robert filed the documents on a Wednesday. I did not call Stephen to tell him. I invited him to dinner. He came on a Friday evening without Michelle. I had specifically said just the 2 of us, which had clearly registered as significant, because he arrived with the careful energy of someone who has been trying to read a situation in advance and has not fully succeeded. I made the meal Beverly used to make for important conversations. Pot roast, the kind that takes all day, that makes the house smell like something worth coming home to. Stephen sat at the kitchen table where he had done homework as a boy, and did not say much while I finished the preparations. We ate. I let him have the meal. Then I put down my fork and looked at my son. "I want to talk about Thursday," I said. He had known it was coming. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. "Dad, I'm not angry," I said. "I want to start there. I am not angry with you." He looked at his plate. "I'm going to tell you something that I should have told you a long time ago," I said, "and I want you to hear all of it before you respond. Can you do that?" He looked up, nodded. "For 4 years," I said, "I have been watching you move me toward the edge of your life. Not dramatically, not unkindly, just gradually. Shorter calls, later responses, visits that got less frequent. The birthday you almost forgot." I paused, and I said nothing. "Because I am your father and I did not want to be a burden, and I told myself that you were busy and that this was just how adult life worked." He was very still. "On Thursday morning," I said, "my chest was tight and my left arm felt wrong, and I called you. And you told me Biscuit needed to finish." The kitchen was completely quiet. "I don't tell you this to make you feel guilty," I said. "I tell you this because what happened on Thursday was the clearest possible picture of where I had ended up in your priorities. And I needed you to see that picture clearly." "Dad," his voice was rough. "I didn't know it was serious. I thought you were." "I know," I said. "That's exactly the point. You thought I was probably fine because you had gotten used to thinking of me as probably fine. As someone who could wait. As someone whose needs were less urgent than a dog walk." He pressed his fingers to his mouth. "I've made some changes," I said, "to my documents. Robert Okafor has the details if you want them. I'm not telling you this to threaten you or to punish you." I looked at my son. "I'm telling you because you deserve to hear it from me directly at this table." "What kind of changes?" he said quietly. I told him, clearly, factually, without drama. He sat with it for a long moment. "Dorothy Pemberton," he said finally. "You left money to Dorothy Pemberton. She drove me to the hospital," I said. "She sat in a waiting room for 4 hours. She brought me coffee and a crossword puzzle book." I paused. "She showed up, Stephen. When I needed someone to show up, she showed up." He was quiet for a very long time. "I'm going to do better," he said. "I know you are," I said. "I believe that. But I also needed the documents to reflect reality as it has been, not as I hope it will be." I looked at him steadily. "If the reality changes, over time, consistently, not because of what's in a will, but because you've decided it should, then we can talk about the documents again." He nodded. Then he looked up at me with his mother's eyes. Beverly's eyes, the ones he had always had, the ones that told me everything he was feeling before he found words for it. "Dad," he said. "I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "Eat your pot roast. That was 14 months ago. Stephen calls every Tuesday and Thursday. Not every other week, twice a week, reliably, the way a man calls when he has decided that showing up is not a feeling but a practice. He came last month for a weekend, alone. Michelle had a conference, and he came anyway, which told me something. We watched a game on Saturday and drove out to the cemetery on Sunday morning to put flowers on Beverly's grave, which we had not done together in 3 years. Standing there in the February cold with my son beside me, I thought about Dorothy Pemberton, who comes by on Wednesday mornings now for coffee and crosswords, and about my 2 former students who call every few months, and about the scholarship in Beverly's name that will fund a young teacher's education every year for as long as the money holds. I thought about the Thursday morning when my chest felt tight and my son chose a dog walk. I thought about the second call. And I thought about the specific truth that I had learned in 70 years of living more clearly than almost anything else. The people in your life are not defined by what they say they will do. They are defined by what they do when it actually matters. Dorothy Pemberton knew that. My former students knew it. Beverly had known it every day of her life. Stephen is learning it now. Better late than never. If this story stayed with you, hit that like button and subscribe to Dad's True Revenge. Every week, real stories about the moments that reveal who people actually are. Drop a comment. Tell me what you would have done differently. And remember, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And when they decide to become someone better, believe that too. See you next week.